January 1, 1917. Professor Dmitry Kosorotov pulls back the frozen cloth covering a corpse in the St. Petersburg morgue. And what he finds will shatter everything the world believes about one of history's most infamous deaths. 3 bullets, 3 different calibers, 3 different weapons. But here's the detail that changes everything. The killing shot came from a British military revolver that none of the Russian conspirators even owned. For over a century we've been told the legend of the mad monk who wouldn't die, the mystic who survived enough cyanide to kill 5 men, who shrugged off bullets like they were nothing, who clawed desperately at river ice from below as the frozen water pulled him down. The story has been immortalized in films, songs, and countless retellings. But when you actually read Professor Kosorotov's autopsy report, the one still sitting in the archives, you realize we've been telling this story completely backwards. The truth is so much darker than the legend. December 30th, 1916. Inside the Moika Palace on the Neva River, 5 conspirators wait in a basement room they've converted into a makeshift dining area. Prince Felix Yusupov, one of the wealthiest men in all of Russia, richer than the Tsar himself, checks his pocket watch. It's 11:45 at night. In 15 minutes, Grigori Rasputin will arrive, lured by the promise of meeting Yusupov's beautiful wife. The table has been carefully set with cakes and Madeira wine. Dr. Lazarevert claims he's laced them with enough potassium cyanide to kill an elephant. But there's one problem nobody in that room knows yet. The poison might already be completely useless. To understand why 5 of Russia's most powerful nobles were waiting in a basement to murder a Siberian peasant, you need to understand what St. Petersburg looked like in December of 1916. The city was freezing, -20°C on most nights. Bread lines stretched for blocks. The Russian army had lost 2 million men in a war that seemed endless, and at the center of it all, whispers about one man dominated every conversation from palace drawing rooms to factory floors. Grigory Yefimovich Rasputin, born in 1869 in Pokrovskoye, a village so remote the nearest railroad was 200 miles away. His father was a farmer who transported goods by horse cart. Rasputin himself couldn't read or write until his late 20s. Yet by 1916, this illiterate peasant was deciding which generals commanded Russia's armies, which ministers served in the government, perhaps even whether Russia would continue fighting in the war at all. Here's what made him different from every other mystic wandering through St. Petersburg, claiming holy powers. On October 1, 1905, he was introduced to the one family in Russia that desperately needed a miracle. TsarNicholas II and Tsarina Alexandra had 4 beautiful daughters, but their only son Alexei, the heir to 3 centuries of Romanov rule, had hemophilia. If you're not familiar with hemophilia in 1916, imagine this. A single bruise could create internal bleeding that lasted for weeks. A nosebleed could be fatal. A minor fall could cause blood to pool in joints until the child screamed in agony for days on end. The Romanovs kept Alexei's condition secret from the Russian people. But inside the palace, they watched their son nearly die over and over again. The royal doctors had one treatment: aspirin, a new wonder drug from Germany that reduced fever and pain. Except here's what nobody knew in 1916. Aspirin thins your blood. For a hemophiliac, it's essentially poison. Every dose made Alexei's bleeding catastrophically worse. Then Rasputin arrived. The Tsarina would send for him during Alexei's bleeding episodes. He'd pray over the boy, insist all medicines be stopped, demand complete quiet and rest, and somehow, miraculously, Alexei would recover. We now know exactly why this worked. Removing the aspirin stopped making the bleeding worse. The calm environment reduced Alexei's heart rate and blood pressure, slowing the hemorrhaging naturally. Rasputin didn't have healing powers. He had accidentally stumbled onto the exact opposite of what the doctors were doing. But to a desperate mother watching her only son survive crisis after crisis after crisis, it looked like God himself was working through this strange Siberian peasant, and that belief would lead to something far more terrifying than anyone could imagine. By 1915, Rasputin wasn't just visiting the palace anymore. He was essentially living there, his influence growing with every passing day. When World War I started and Nicholas left for the front to command the army, Alexandra was left in charge of the government, and she turned to the one man who had never failed to save her son. But here's what the history books usually skip. Rasputin had already survived one assassination attempt, and the details revealed something crucial about what would happen in 1916. On July 1914, back in his home village of Pokrovskoye, a woman in a black dress approached him on the street asking for money. Her name was Kyonia Gaseva, and hidden under her cloak was a 15-inch dagger. She drove it straight into his abdomen, ripping upward to cause maximum damage. As Rasputin stumbled backward, literally holding his intestines in with his hands, she screamed that she had killed the Antichrist and chased him down the street trying to finish the job. Rasputin survived after 7 weeks of agonizing recovery, but the wound changed him forever. His daughter Maria later wrote that he was never the same. He drank more heavily, became paranoid, started carrying protective charms, and most importantly, he began regularly eating massive quantities of raw garlic, a Siberian folk remedy he believed would purify his blood and protect him from future attacks. This detail, the garlic consumption, would matter more than anyone realized. Back in December of 1916, Russia was collapsing from within. In the past year alone, the Tsarina, guided by Rasputin's advice, had appointed and dismissed 4 prime ministers, 5 interior ministers, and 3 foreign ministers. This endless game of musical chairs paralyzed the government exactly when it needed stable leadership most desperately. The breaking point came when Rasputin convinced Alexandra to appoint Alexander Protopapov as interior minister. Protopapov was quite possibly insane. He claimed to channel the spirit of Christ during cabinet meetings. Even Rasputin supporters thought this appointment had gone too far. Prince Felix Yusupov decided to act at 29 years old. Yusupov owned 4 palaces in St. Petersburg alone. His family's wealth came from oil fields, coal mines, and estates covering an area the size of Belgium. He'd studied at Oxford, spoke perfect English, and most importantly, he'd cultivated a careful friendship with Rasputin over the past 2 years, gaining his trust completely. Yusupov recruited for co-conspirators: Grand Duke Dmitry Pavlovich, the Tsar's own cousin; Vladimir Purishkevich, a monarchist politician who had given a speech in the Duma calling Rasputin a dark force destroying Russia; Dr. Stanislaus Lazarevich, who would provide the poison; and Lieutenant Sergei Sukotin, an army officer home from the front. They chose the basement of Yusupov's Smoyka Palace because it had a separate entrance and was being renovated. Any noise could be explained as construction work. At midnight exactly, Rasputin arrived. Dressed in his finest clothes, a blue silk shirt, embroidered with cornflowers, black velvet trousers, and his newest boots. He'd spent an hour combing his beard with a special ivory comb the Tsarina had given him, according to Yusupov's later memoir. Written in 1927 when he was living in poverty in Paris and desperately needed money from book sales, Rasputin ate the poisoned cakes and drank glass after glass of poisoned wine. Enough cyanide to kill 5 men, Yusupov claimed. Yet Rasputin just complained of a burning sensation in his stomach and asked for tea. For 2 agonizing hours Yusupov sat watching, waiting for him to die. But here's the crucial detail that every documentary misses. Professor Kosarotov's autopsy, performed just 3 days later, found absolutely no trace of poison in Rasputin's stomach or organs whatsoever. None. Not even residue. Which means either the garlic had neutralized it, the cyanide had degraded into harmless compounds, or most likely, there never was any poison at all. At 2:30 in the morning, Yusupov made a decision. He returned to the basement carrying Grand Duke Dmitry's Browning pistol behind his back. As Rasputin leaned forward to examine a crystal crucifix, Yusupov raised the weapon and shot him in the left side of the chest. The bullet passed through Rasputin's stomach and liver. Blood immediately soaked through the blue silk shirt. Rasputin let out what Yusupov described as a wild, human scream and collapsed backward onto the white bearskin rug. Dr. Lazarevich checked for a pulse and declared him dead. They turned off the lights, locked the basement, and went upstairs to plan the body disposal. But Yusupov couldn't stop himself from checking one more time. This is where even skeptics admit something extraordinary happened. As Yusupov leaned over the body 30 minutes later, Rasputin's left eye opened, then the right. According to Yusupov's terrified account, he saw both eyes, green as a viper's, staring at him with an expression of pure, diabolical hatred. Rasputin lunged upward, grabbing Yusupov's shoulder with such force he tore off an epaulette. Foam and blood poured from his mouth as he made a sound Yusupov described as a terrible, animal roar. Now medically this isn't supernatural. A liver shot, even one causing massive bleeding, doesn't immediately stop the heart. Rasputin had been unconscious from shock and blood loss, but adrenaline can create moments of extreme strength and consciousness even in dying people. What happened next was pure survival instinct. Rasputin pushed himself up and staggered toward the door leading to the courtyard, leaving a thick trail of blood across the floor. He was moving, actually escaping. Vladimir Purishkevich heard the screaming and ran downstairs just in time to see Rasputin push through the door into the snow-covered courtyard. It was 3:15 in the morning, -8°C. Rasputin was stumbling toward the iron gate that led to the street, leaving dark bloodstains in the fresh white snow. Purishkevich pulled out his savage pistol and fired. Missed, fired again. Missed. Rasputin was now on all fours, crawling through the snow, still desperately heading for the gate and freedom. The third shot hit him in the back, passing through his kidney. He collapsed face first into the snow but incredibly tried to keep crawling forward. The fourth shot struck him somewhere in the head, though Purishkevich couldn't see exactly where in the darkness. But even then, Rasputin was still moving, still fighting to survive. Yusupov ran out with a rubber club and began beating him viciously. The others joined in. The autopsy would later find his testicles had been crushed, his right eye swollen completely shut, and multiple blunt force injuries across his entire body. Here's where the forensic evidence tells a completely different story than any memoir. Professor Kosarotov found 3 bullet wounds, not 2, and the third one, the one that actually killed Rasputin, was fascinating. It was in the center of his forehead with distinctive powder burns, indicating a contact shot, the gun pressed directly against his skin. The bullet was from a .455 caliber weapon. Neither Yusupov's Browning nor Purishkevich's Savage fired that caliber. But you know what did? The Webley revolver, standard issue for British military officers. And there was a British military officer at the Moika Palace that night, one the conspirators never mentioned in their memoirs. Oswald Rayner, officially a language teacher, actually an agent of the British Secret Intelligence Service. He was Yusupov's close friend from Oxford, and he was almost certainly in that courtyard. British intelligence had every reason to want Rasputin dead. They'd intercepted communications, suggesting he was pushing the Tsarina toward a separate peace with Germany. If Russia left the war, 1 million German soldiers would transfer to the Western Front. Britain couldn't afford that. The forensics suggest that after Yusupov's brutal beating, as Rasputin lay broken but still breathing in the snow, Rayner stepped forward with his Webley, pressed it to Rasputin's forehead, and delivered a professional execution shot, the kind British intelligence officers were trained to perform. They wrapped Rasputin's body in heavy cloth, tied it with rope, loaded it into Grand Duke Dmitri's car, and drove to the Bolshoi-Petrovsky Bridge. They found a hole in the ice from earlier construction work. Perfect. They weighted the body with chains and pushed Grigori Rasputin through the hole into the black water below. For the next 100 years, people would claim Rasputin was still alive when he hit the water, that he'd broken free of his bonds and clawed at the ice from below. That water in his lungs proved he drowned. Professor Kozarotov's autopsy destroys this myth completely. No water in the lungs. No swelling of lung tissue, no foamy fluid in the airways. Rasputin was dead before he hit the water. The man who wouldn't die had finally died. But it took poison that may never have existed. 4 bullets from 3 different guns, a savage beating, and finally, a British execution shot pressed directly to his forehead. When police pulled Rasputin's frozen body from the river on January 1, 1917, they immediately notified the Tsar. His response, recorded by an aide: "I am ashamed before Russia that the hands of my relatives are stained with the blood of a simple peasant." The Tsarina's reaction was worse. She demanded the conspirators be executed immediately. When Nicholas refused, she fell into hysterics that lasted for days. She kept Rasputin's bloodstained shirt as a holy relic until the day the Bolsheviks murdered her entire family. The conspirators faced almost no consequences. Within 3 months, the Russian Revolution would sweep away the Romanovs forever, and the men who killed Rasputin would scatter across Europe, each telling slightly different versions of that December night, each one claiming credit, each one lying about what really happened in the snow. The legend says Rasputin wouldn't die. The truth is darker. He did die, desperately and violently, crawling through blood-stained snow, betrayed by men who smiled to his face, murdered by a foreign agent whose government needed him silenced. There was no supernatural survival. Just a man fighting with everything he had to live, and ultimately failing. Sometimes the real horror isn't in the legend. It's in the truth we've been too afraid to face.